So let's turn off the phone. All right. Oh yeah, okay, 11:38. We'll stick to that order, okay? I think. Yeah. Okay. Good. So, are we on yet? Okay, good. Good morning, everybody. My name is Christophe Raab. I'm the chairman of the European Security Roundtable, and I have the pleasure of chairing this panel, as I was told, is having the challenging duty of setting the scene for the rest of the further event today. So we'll try our very best to do that and to give you lots of insights and discussion on cybersecurity strategies before you will delve later on today deeper into the topics. Setting the scene and giving you the overview of cybersecurity strategies as they currently exist or have been existing for some years or are actually already being under review, and their impact on readiness levels and possible changes. So that's what we're here to do in the next 1.5 hours with our distinguished speakers, which I'll be very pleased to introduce to you. There is Mr. Paul Timmers to my left, who is a director at the European Commission in DG Connect, and he's director for the Digital Society Trust and Security in that Directorate General. Paul Timmers deals there with policy and R&I, which I interpret as research and innovation, in ICT and cybersecurity. And before that, he was a member of the cabinet of the Commissioner for Enterprise and Information Society. And before joining the European Commission, Mr. Timmers has experience from the private sector. He was product marketing manager in a large IT company. And he holds a PhD in theoretical physics. I'm not sure how much that relates to your current work, but it may actually still. And second is Jamie Shea on the very left, who is Deputy Assistant Secretary General at NATO in the Emerging Security Challenges Division. And I can say has held numerous positions within NATO for long times. And Jamie is also very active in teaching. He's a professor at the College of Europe in Bruges. He's an associate professor at the American University in Washington and lectures at the Brussels campus of the University of Kent and holds a doctorate in modern history from Oxford University. And he's also a member of the board at Chatham House and the Security and Defense Agenda in Brussels, and also at in the board of the European Security Roundtable. And third is Marc Henauer, here on the left, head of the unit in the Swiss Ministry of Defense in the, sorry, turning my page, head of the MELANI Operation Information Center. So he's responsible to support the Swiss critical infrastructures within their information assurance process, to say it very concretely. And there's Wolfgang Röhrig, the cyber lead at the European Defense Agency. So I think I can say the cybersecurity expert at the European Defense Agency at the EU. And I've had the pleasure to see that confirmed already a number of times. So thanks, Wolfgang, for being with us today. We have 1.5 hours. We'll stick to the order as the panelists are here. So Paul Timmers will start first. And I've been informed that Paul Timmers has to leave at 12:30 for a meeting with his commissioner. So we'll make sure that you take part in the discussion beforehand, and any questions then we will direct to you first. And with that, Paul, I give you the floor for your presentation, please.
Thank you very much, Christophe, and thank you very much for the organizers and Anne in particular in inviting the European Commission to be at this panel. What I will do is give a very brief, because Christophe was kind enough to only give us a few minutes, insight in what is happening at the European level in some of the European cybersecurity strategy work, and a brief reflection on what is happening also at the national level. And I'm sure that the other panelists will provide you with a lot more information that hopefully is complementary to what I'm telling here. Now, talking about cybersecurity strategies, our framework, let me see if this one works. Did I get the next slide? Yeah. Our framework at European level is the European Cybersecurity Strategy that was adopted about 2 years ago, an open, safe and secure cyberspace. And actually it's quite interesting that that kind of subtitle was given, an open, safe and secure cyberspace, because if we really live up to that, we have to strike the balance between these kind of contradictory or hard to reconcile type of objectives. And we are exposed to that every day. I only need to think back of the discussions that have been held just very recently of the ministers in Riga as a follow-up to the Charlie Hebdo event. That shows how difficult it is to develop a European or a national cybersecurity strategy, let alone a global one, for an open, safe and secure cyberspace. Nevertheless, that's serious, that's what we stick to. And this strategy is broken down into a number of areas around cyber resilience, around reducing cybercrime, around increasing our capabilities in cyber defense and international cyberspace policy, an underpinning to have better industrial capability and technological resources for cybersecurity in a broad sense, and this based upon a number of values, fundamental rights to be applicable and be respected, access for all, pursuing democratic multi-stakeholder involvement and governance, and taking cybersecurity as a shared responsibility. Now, this is the broad framework, and within the framework established 2 years ago, and I think at that time it was really up to date for the developments also in the world. A lot has been happening since. Yesterday I was reading an article that said something like EU stumbles on in the field of cybersecurity, and actually that article was quite positive because it was stating that so much has happened in this field over the past few years, and even if it is not easy at European level to get to progress in a number of areas, this is actually an area where a lot has been happening and a lot of progress, despite, let's say, the challenges of working together with 28 member states has been achieved, and more countries, as a matter of fact. Now, looking at what is then on the table here, a few elements. The European Cybersecurity Strategy itself, still a reference point and subject to continued development. The NIS Directive, which stands for Network and Information Security Directive, which is the legislative hardcore proposal in the European Cybersecurity Strategy, and under discussion, advanced discussions in Council and Parliament. A private-public cooperation that has been established, the NIS platform, which works a lot on risk management, a key aspect of that. And if you are not yet a member with your organization of the NIS platform, I would recommend that you do so. And the risk management approaches that are developed there, although developed in the European scene, we expect will also be very much usable transatlantic or perhaps even internationally, because our friends in the US are doing similar kind of work. Research and innovation and the deployment investment framework have been set up with sizable funding that is happening at European level. Cyber defense policy framework, which will be presented here, cyber diplomacy conclusions that are established, etc. So a range of developments that have been happening that give us a basis for work in the area, and also work at the national level. And conversely, what is happening at the national level is the national cybersecurity strategies is very much inspiring what is happening at the European level. And perhaps I can actually illustrate that looking at the Network and Information Security Directive. So that is a legislative part that has been put in place or is still under the legislative discussion, but we hope that that will progress and can be completed rather rapidly. It is based upon really the economic social considerations of the information society, that we want to have continuity of these economic and social benefits of information technology in Europe. So it's an internal market directive, as we say so, but it's very much back-to-back with anything that is happening in the field of cybercrime, data protection, and also international collaboration in the field of cybersecurity. So it's one of those cornerstones of the European cybersecurity strategy, but you have to see it in the light of these other components that I showed in the diagram before. Now, in the NIS directive, we have 3 pillars. They are around the capabilities at member state level. They are around the cooperation between the member states in order to be able to deal with significant incidents with the cross-border nature. And they are about the obligations on certain actors in the private sector to do proper risk management and security breach notification. Now, if I look at what is happening at the national level, then our agency for network and information security, ENISA, has on its website an overview of these national cybersecurity strategies. And you will find 19 of these strategies there. So there are 19 out of the 28 member states that have a national cybersecurity strategy in place according to what ENISA is surveying. And some of these strategies are in their 2nd or 3rd edition. For example, Czech Republic, Estonia, Netherlands, United Kingdom. They have all been advancing in these strategies and taking into account the more recent developments and the maturing in the field. Even I think collectively amongst us, we still have, in a certain sense, the feeling that we are at the beginning here. So there are some common trends. First of all, they have been broadening their scope. They start perhaps at the continuity and the resilience of the network and information systems, but then it's also very much about the fight against cybercrime. And it's also very much about how do you reconcile privacy with security, that open, safe, and secure cyberspace. And to some extent, we think that also the European cybersecurity strategy has contributed with its multi-pillar approach, resilience, cybercrime, fundamental rights focus, to strengthening the development of more comprehensive strategies at the national level. The other element that you see coming up at the national level very much so is private-public cooperation in sectors and across sectors of the economy, where there is cooperation about risk management and information sharing, such as an information sharing platform that has been created in the UK that serve the economy. So PPPs, private-public partnerships, are certainly part of the name of the game. And then it's also increasingly recognized that, yes, we do need to have mastery of these underlying technologies and keep up with that. And some member states are also putting industrial capabilities and industrial strategies in place, something that we still need to strengthen at the European level. It's an area that we are also working on at the European level. And then in development that you see is increasingly reference points, standards, common specifications, addressing certification, as for example in Austria. And that's likely to increase. We need to have these reference points in order to get the economies of scale to be able to work together in addressing the cybersecurity challenges, but also really from an industrial point of view. Some countries have moved from strategies also to legislation. Germany has introduced legislation, the Czech Republic, Estonia, Finland, and in many cases we see that this type of legislation is linked to or mirroring the work in the NIS directive. So around capabilities, around risk management, around breach notification, around cooperation between the private and the public sector. And these strategies and also the legislation actually allows new business models to come up. So we see clearly a lot of interest from the insurance sector, being aware that this is about risk management. There is no 100% coverage of risk, so there's a remaining risk that you need to cover in, for example, cyber insurance. And finally, that these strategies, two aspects that the strategies, they are no longer, let's say, strategies and words. They are also very practical advice. There is lots of hands-on work that is happening now, more training that we see coming up. Not yet fully fledged, not yet across sectors, but to some extent it's starting to happen, as well as increased attention for raising awareness. There I can point, for example, to the European Cybersecurity Awareness Month that is co-organized or organized by ENISA. So altogether, quite a lot of development at the national level in line with a number of trends. And I think generally they try to address some of these factors that are influencing the whole field of cyber risk management, which is extremely challenging. I mean, it's like an open door. You all know about that, but it's still good to point out a number of factors because it's far from static. The adversaries are evolving, and so different from, even different in a certain sense from tackling a health crisis like Ebola. Here you've got an intelligent adversary in many cases, or the human factor that you bring into account, which changes continuously the landscape, and previous speakers addressed that. And also, most importantly, the evolution of technology. I'm going to sit later with my commissioner. It's about the evolution of technology in a certain sector of the industry. Cybersecurity is going to be key, is already key in many sectors, and the fast evolution of technology, while we keep legacy systems in place, makes that we have to adapt our strategies. And I don't think we've got a real good handle on doing that combination between the new and the old, let alone the very challenging things that are discussed in major conferences like the Hague Conference, the interplay between foreign policy, economic and social aspects of cybersecurity, the cybercrime aspects, cyber forensics aspects that are here in the panel. So we see that there are quite significant challenges ahead to continue developing these strategies. We are working with the 28 member states in a platform which is called the European the EFMS platform of the member states that are explaining their strategies, comparing that to each other. And again, ENISA is helping us to develop, let's say, comparable approaches in these strategies. And let me stop at that point. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul, for this panopticon, or Pandora's box, however you might want to say, of all the challenges in the sector. Was a great outline. On the evolution of adversaries, I just would like to add, I'm coming straight from a breakfast event we had this morning on cybersecurity norms, which tapped a bit on similar issues, and it's true that there's a whole continuity now of actors. It's no longer so clear cut who is doing what, who is an adversary. That goes all the way from criminals to state-on-state activities. And needs to be addressed on all these respective levels, and you're covering your part of it. With that, I would like to hand over to Jamie, who will deal with the topic from a NATO and defense perspective. Jamie, please.
Christophe, I hope you don't mind if I stand up. I mean, that high table makes me feel like a dwarf out of Lord of the Rings. So thanks for that. First of all, I'm not going to present any slides. I'm a disciple of the British 18th century aristocrat Lord Acton, who said, "Power corrupts, and PowerPoint corrupts absolutely." In any case, I can talk a lot faster without them. So I hope that my Cockney English is not an impediment to good communication. And here we go. First point. I'm really pleased, as somebody who goes to the occasional cyber conference, that this is being held in a university rather than a bank or a government ministry. Cyber is one of those areas of strategy where the academic world is absolutely crucial in terms of developing expertise, in terms of capacity building, and in training. And one of the things that we need in government is to reach out much more as we look to the future of the internet and how to build it in a more secure way, how to have a better understanding of assessment of management of risk, that we have not just a public-private partnership, there's a lot about that, and Paul has eloquently addressed that, but a government-academic partnership as well. And we also look at how universities in their postgraduate, undergraduate courses can also develop more MAs in cyber defense and cyber security, because we will fail if the technology advances, but we're unable to develop the cyber jeddies of the future who are able to interpret that and operate that. So first point, bravo to the KU Leuven for taking the lead and doing something very rare, which is to have a major cyber conference at intergovernmental level in a university. Good example. Well done, Belgium. Number two, obviously you cannot deal with cyber defense unless you have a strategy. The strategy has to clearly look at three critical things. Who is in charge? Cyber is such a diffuse area which is sort of repercuted through so many different parts of the organization that it's actually very difficult to point to an accountable person in charge. This is fundamental. The strategy has to recognize that. Secondly, what is the level of risk that I am prepared to accept? One of the things that cyber has taught us in military strategy, which is what I deal with, is that you can't have absolute security. Like you will try to have in missile defense or nuclear deterrence or other areas. You know, cyber is inherently insecure. It's cat and mouse. The hackers are very quick at adjusting to whatever defense we come up with. So you can only have relative security and a constant effort to improve it. So you have to live with a high degree of risk. And what is therefore the risk that you can accept and what the risk that you cannot accept? You have to be able to define that realistically. That is a constant failing of so many organizations. And thirdly, how is my organization adjusted to address the risk factor that I'm accepting in terms of our business practices? It's no good identifying a certain level of risk at the top level, which the organization in its day-to-day practices, in individual people, in individuals' work, contradicts. So we have to pin those down. And that means that we have to break our strategy down into the policy elements, into capabilities, Paul addressed this already, and into expertise, policy, expertise, capability. And this is what I'd like to address very briefly. But the other thing is that cyber strategy is often talked about in rather abstract technological terms, as if it's all simply a question of system and technology and process. These are important, but there are politics in cyber defense, as there are politics in nuclear deterrence or collective defense or crisis management or any other aspect. And at NATO, we had to learn one fundamental thing, that when you are in an organization where levels of cyber expertise are massively different from those who are investing billions every year and started early, and those who have been in denial, it's not going to happen to me, and have started very late, you have to construct some kind of political agreement, a bargain to move forward. And in NATO, essentially, this took us several years to persuade countries like the United States, United Kingdom, there are others, with very sophisticated cyber capabilities across the whole spectrum, to share the data, to share the intelligence, to share those capabilities with other allies, and accept the risks of putting these capabilities into a collective framework. But on the other hand, those countries that were potential risks because of underinvestment and leaks had to agree to come up to certain minimal standards, certain norms of expertise, of information assurance, to be considered as viable partners. And it's equalizing those two levels, which is the key to be able to move forward as an organization. And so that is what we had to do. So where are we? First of all, policy. Well, the first thing about cyber is, again, there is a major difference from something like nuclear deterrence, which is that in the cyber world, a good defense is also the best deterrence. So we had to start with that, in other words, protecting our own systems. This was far from easy. In NATO, we have 100,000 users. We have 54 different major locations. We have 10 levels of security classification. And we have 36 different major information networks, some static, some mobile, such as in Afghanistan or in the Balkans on operations. The problem often with cyber is that, rather like strata in rock formations, several generations of information technology systems have been simply put on top of each other, and the more different systems you have, the more interfaces that you have to protect, and the more weak links that you have to address. So clearly, before we could develop any kind of level of ambition, we had first of all to bring all of those networks under centralized 24/7 protection, which we achieved last year with the full operational capability of NATO's NSERC, our NATO Computer Incident Response Center, which is located at Shea in Mons. We still have a little bit of work to do with more sites and with a decision support difficult system to help operators distinguish between fake attacks, decoys, and real attacks, but we are well on our way. So those two things, being able to protect our own systems and being able to get the powerful countries to provide more assistance to the less able countries, has now made it possible for us to adopt a new cyber defense strategy, which we approved at the level of heads of state and government at NATO's summit last September in Wales. What are the key ingredients? Well, the first thing is that we've put cyber at the level of an Article 5 collective defense commitment. So we have said that at a certain threshold, a cyber attack is the equivalent in international law of armed attack, that the international law of armed conflict applies to the virtual cyber domain, to electrons, as much as to missiles and to tanks, and that therefore NATO would treat a major cyber attack as an act of international armed aggression and would, under international law, would be able to respond appropriately, which does not limit the response, of course, to the cyber field either. Now, having said that, I'm the first person to admit that it's a bit more complicated than that, and we will have to have an internal NATO discussion to have a better understanding of what that threshold where you cross from virtual to the kinetic would be, and whether this would be a purely cyber offensive or whether it would be a cyber offensive to begin or as part of a conventional armed attack, because you have these two scenarios, and then what our graduated response options would be. So we still have to do that work, but we've established a fundamental principle that what is not permissible in the real world is not permissible simply because it happens in cyberspace. The next thing is that we have looked at our NATO plans on the understanding that every conflict from now on, I mean, this has already been the case for the last 10 years, is going to have a cyber dimension, which could be more or less effective. It could be big at the beginning and then fade away, but we might have to operate in a cyber-depleted environment in terms of not having access to all of our bandwidth and information systems. And we need, in training and exercises and in standing defense plans, to factor in that and to be able to cope with that type of situation. It's rather like a car. If we only have 3 wheels, we need to be moving along. And now on, NATO's major exercises, connected with the Readiness Action Plan and the defense of our Eastern European allies, will all have a major cyber element. Of course, it's quite amusing in the real world, because if you announce a big exercise, you have a cyber attack in any case. Obviously, as hackers try to take down your systems. And you have to deal with that real world while you're also rehearsing the fictitious cyber scenario as part of the exercise. And so that's a challenge we have to face. The third element that we have done as part of policy is to define a methodology for knowing and defining on which critical systems in our NATO countries do we depend at NATO headquarters to be able to conduct information assurance? Because, you know, it's like the London Underground map. Every line connects with every other line. It becomes very complicated. So in other words, you have to understand your critical dependencies and the degree of criticality that you are willing to accept. It also allows you to track evolutions. If you know, for example, that, you know, Afghan operations depend upon the information system of the Canadian Postal Service, and that then is taken over by a major company outside NATO, you can then better assess risk. And you can ensure that data coming out of NATO into the nations, from the nations into NATO, has the same degree of assurance. And therefore, you have a minimum requirement and a capability to analyze risk. So those are just a couple of the policy areas. Let me quickly, before Christophe tells me to stop, mention capability. It's very important while you deal with policy that you also give allies better capabilities. Now, one way of doing this is to use the NATO defense planning process, which is normally used to define requirements for tanks and aircraft and drones, also to define cyber requirements as so-called collective capability packages. In other words, what is the minimum that every nation should assume within a certain time frame, and how do you assess and help that nation to meet that standard? And we have begun to do that 2 years ago, and we will continue to do that, so that NATO countries in defence planning will take on cyber defence obligations as well as more conventional ones. This is also linked to a buddy system. You know, one of the best ways to do cyber defence is to partner a capable country with a less capable country, because then in a crisis, the capable country has a very intimate understanding of the information technology of the less capable country and can provide specialist help. We're also working, rather like the EU, on similar things like malware information sharing platforms. Here I can give a plug for Belgium, because Belgium in NATO leads the malware sharing platform. The idea is pretty simple: break the malware down into packets, standardized packages, which can be easily transmitted, which are granular enough to be of use to others as part of an early warning system, but are not sufficiently precise to give away the attribution of the company or the nation, the ministry, which has been attacked, therefore ensuring a certain degree of confidentiality against lawsuits or security breaches. That's one example of a type of capability that we're able to develop. The other thing, of course, is industry, because you're only as good as your partnership with industry. We know that. Cyber, I think, is probably the first security challenge that I've dealt with in my very long career, where you are totally dependent on the private sector to provide the bandwidth, the capability, the crisis management you need. In short, to make the thing go away. And I've experienced that with a number of denial of service attacks over the last year. We now have a NATO cyber industry partnership where we are going to create in The Hague an information innovation hub to fund with industry technological experimentation and development, exercises, training with the private sector, not just to have a better crisis management capability, but to identify better technologies ahead of time to feed them into our defence planning process. Finally, expertise, very important as well. The key thing here is intelligence sharing. It's clear your expertise is only as good as the intel you have. And one of the problems, of course, is human intelligence, classical intelligence, linked with network intelligence. What am I hearing and what am I seeing? And is what I'm seeing compatible with what I'm hearing, and vice versa? How can we put the two together and spread it around? We're doing this at the moment with a cyber intelligence tool linked to our future mission operating network, so that allies and partners can constantly plug in intel on cyber, early warning, which we can then verify on the networks as this is happening. And we have a lot of training and exercises. You've all heard of our NATO center in Estonia, and every year we have Cyber Coalition, we have Lock Shields, where we do red team, blue team, real live cyber defense with 450 operators based on a cyber range, which has been given to us very generously by the government of Estonia, so that we can constantly keep our skills up to the levels that we need. Let me just in 10 seconds, I promise not more. I'm lying. Of course I'm going to take more. 20 seconds. Let me just mention some challenges for the future. The biggest challenge, of course, in this world is to go from detection, I've been attacked and I need to find out, because 45 days is still the average in business to detect an incident. And it's got worse over the last year. It was only 36 days a year or so ago. So actually knowing you've been breached is still amazingly difficult for most of us. What we need to go to, of course, is to anticipation, to see things going more upstream. This means, of course, getting the private sector to provide filters for us so that we can detect at a much earlier stage what is coming down the networks and the cables. But of course, it's also a very controversial issue, because it depends upon active defense, the so-called definition of active defense, where you sweep networks beyond your own to see if you can detect things that could be heading your way, and you go beyond, if you like, the strictly reactive and the defense. But that is a debate that clearly we have to have. Second big debate rate, resilience improvement. How much backup do we need? Do we need an alternative NSERC? You know, how can we modernize our IT to make it functionally smart software, functionally more resilient? You know, the more resilient your IT is, the less defense you have to add to it, obviously. And what is the relationship there? The industry partnership. We need to bring our crisis management procedures in line with the demands of actually dealing with a major cyber conflict, the decision-making level. And to give the decision makers the expertise to sort of navigate their way in this area in the way that they all learned nuclear deterrence in the 1960s when they were at graduate school. And finally, we need to make sure that because we're coping with basically routine stuff, denial of service attacks, hacking, anonymous, you know, just sort of basic sort of espionage, penetration attempts, it's all very routine and little of it has any real consequence apart from reputation damage. So it's easy to get into the syndrome that I can handle this. But are you looking at the black swan, the big thing that could be coming your way in a real conflict, which would overwhelm the ability of your defense to deal with the rather routine things? The private sector, last word, has suffered black swans in a way that NATO never has. You know, we've not suffered the kind of crippling breakdown of our entire systems that Saudi Aramco, for experience, had with Shamoon, or many US companies in recent times have suffered, which have led to bankruptcy or the managers resigning or massive losses. And so we need to learn from the private sector what a real black swan looks like to make sure that we're able to deal with the maybe less likely but more catastrophic, and not just the very likely but little catastrophic scenarios. So we are, to paraphrase Winston Churchill, not at the end, and certainly not even at the beginning of the end, but we're certainly at the end of the beginning when it comes to NATO's cyber defense. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jamie. And I've learned again what a relative concept time is. I never knew how long 20 seconds can be. But think
elastic concept in the cyber world.
Absolute flexibility, right? Is the key word. Okay, good. Thanks very much. And so now I'm turning to Marc Henauer, and coming from Switzerland, it's obvious Switzerland stands for the concept of top quality and security. But as we just learned from Jamie, there is no absolute security in cyber. So Marc, we're very curious to learn from you how you solve the puzzle of being Swiss, living with this great reputation and delivering on something where there's no absolute security. Please, go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. And that's new. Usually if someone says like Switzerland, that's cows, watches, and chocolate, you know? I mean, what was that? Top quality and security? Well, okay. Come to Switzerland and figure out yourself. So actually how we manage this, that's a good question. And figuring out how to be Swiss, actually, that's, you know, we do that since 700 years and we didn't really have a solution yet. So what I want to look at for the moment, because I think that's my part, we heard now from the European Union delegate or member, panelist, about kind of an overarching idea how to tackle this problem. We heard from NATO, which obviously by definition is more defense prone. So you will hear now from a country and hence one of these national cyber strategies as they are shelled out right now, I think about 10 a week or something like that. And this is the Swiss one, and you might, it has an awkward title, and it's actually in German, it doesn't sound better, to be quite honest. But it says the National Strategy for Switzerland's Protection Against Cyber Risk. That's an oxymoron in itself as well, because how can you protect against risk? But the important part is, and I was already told that, or it was already said here before, it's about risk. Most strategies have some kind of defense in the title, or security in the title. We on purpose tried to avoid that, and I will show you why. Because I tried to come a little bit be less technical and come a little bit more from a conceptual view on how a nation might approach actually a strategy like that. So, brings me to the point. As it always is with strategies, well, I don't care. So, as it always is, just one, maybe? Yes. As it always is with strategies, especially on a national level, at any given time and point, you know that your politicians, your government will come up with the idea and say, we need that now. So in Switzerland, that happened in 2010. And the task was a very simple one. It was like, we need a cyber strategy now. Well, obviously not now, but how about starting now so we have one in a couple of years. So in 2010, there was this mandate which the national ministers formulated, and that was basically what it had to fulfill. It said there is a strategic goal. We want to have early recognition of cyber threats. Okay, that's one thing. We want increased resilience of our critical infrastructure in this domain. I mean, we heard that before as well, resilience. And we want to have a sustainable minimization of risks, which come with the whole cyber issue. And we don't want to have that only on governmental level. So we do not talk about a governmental strategy. We want to have that to apply to the private sector, critical infrastructures, national authorities, federal authorities, obviously. We want the population included, and we want to have obviously also an international component because we are not alone in this. So hence, it's a national strategy, it's not a governmental strategy. Now, as soon as you have to do that, it's one thing to have a strategy if you're an entity and write up a strategy for yourself, how to protect or how to handle and tackle these issues within that one given entity. As soon as you talk national, and that's probably not different as for the EU, if you talk international in that kind of things, it has to be scalable, it has to become flexible, and it has to be somehow adaptable, because everyone has different needs and everyone has different concerns. So what we were coming up with was the issue that instead of just coming up with a strategy, and we tried first to look at what's actually one of the fundamental, what we think, fundamental problems right now in dealing with this cyber issue. And what was one of the fundamental problems as we identified it, and that's basically the logic framework behind that strategy, how we wrote it up, was that we said, let's, what is cyber risk? Let's define, I mean, it's not a hard definition. Let's define it. That's risks originating for certain given processes in certain given entities, which stem from the fact that you run processes nowadays completely or in part over ICT components. So, and that is a different risk set. Meaning, in the old days, if you had an internal postal service, risks that message from A to B did not arrive at B were manifold. Maybe the internal postal service, had to use a car, could give an accident, paper could get lost. It had to be sent by a plane. Maybe plane fell down, paper lost. So that's risks that will actually avoid. That's the risk to not arriving from A to B if it comes to your letters. Nowadays, if you send emails, that's a good thing because a lot of that risk set is minimized. Just for the simple fact, the internet is not falling down and actually car accidents won't stop your email from going to A to B. But you have a different risk set now. It's still the same process. Sending information from A to B, risk set has changed. And what we usually did in the last decades, if it came to this kind of issues, we said, okay, you understand, this is a risk set and it originates from the fact that our processes are run over IT. That's a technical issue. Let's take technical measures and minimize this risk. Oops, that was a little bit fast. So, yeah, okay. So, let's minimize this risk. Technical risk, hence technical measures, problem solved. Well, that is not so, because usually what happens is that, first of all, your technical security measures are not the only security measures at hand. You have all kinds of security measures, personnel, physical, organizational security measures, and so on. Number two, your risk to a given process, even if it's heavily technically supported, is not just a technical risk. There are physical, there are personal risks included in any given process. So that is actually part of a holistic risk for any given process. And if you come from that side, someone has to decide which security measures to take to actually minimize the overall risk. And that, so I learned when I studied economy, is your executives. In German, it's the Geschäftsleitung, your board of directors, whatever you want to go and call them. they are paid for managing risk. It's not the IT department that is paid for managing risks. So what you have to do is you have to make sure that that level, the executive level, understands any given risk, the overall risk for any given process, which could be business critical to them. That's number one. Then they will decide what package of security measures will be most likely the best cost benefit to minimize the overall risk, and by that also the technical risks or cyber risks. So that was the logic framework behind that. And as soon as you run with a logic framework like that, it cannot be an IT security-based strategy anymore, even if you call it cyber strategy. So what does the national cyber strategy in Switzerland try to do? It tries to actually exactly help or put processes in place which allow A, to identify that red pie slide, integrate it into the overall slide, and manage that that a framework is in place. So actually those that have to decide understand that this is about impact and services and not the system itself, and take the correct bunch of measures. That's the whole trick. And that obviously forms a slightly different approach. Before Jamie Shea said it very nicely, one of the things the strategy has to define is who is actually in charge. Yeah, well, who's in charge? Now I said the executive level is in charge, but as soon as you say the executive level and the risk owner is in charge, it can't be one person, one entity, and certainly not on a national level. It's distributed responsibility because everyone has different risks and owns different risks. So the strategy automatically has to be dealing with that. So one of the core points of the strategy when we came up with it was obviously there is a strong core of the classic self-responsibility. What does that mean? Cyber risks are part of existing responsibilities. If you are a critical infrastructure provider and you buy a lot of IT to make your processes more efficient, and then you figure out that you cannot handle these risks, there shall not be the possibility to run to the state and delegate that part of your risk responsibility just because you had to do it, but you actually didn't think about what it brings in terms of your critical processes. That's not going to happen. So risk management is the game in this. We have to manage risks. So there will be always risks left, obviously. What does that mean? That means that, for example, if you are in the business of providing a critical service to a state, your perception of what is an acceptable risk, so to speak, might slightly differ to what the state understands as acceptable risks. That's where regulators come into play, because they usually will go to you and will tell you, that's nice from a market point of view, you're absolutely right, this risk is maybe acceptable for you. From a national perspective, this is not acceptable, hence we will do what kind of ever, we will do certifications, we will do regulations and so on, and then starts the pay game, you know, to actually minimize this risk to a national acceptable level. This also means something. For example, you must empower regulators to understand that this is something they have to deal with. Energy regulators, for example, tend to be very good in looking at how to provide and come up with legal frameworks that will provide a certain energy, a certain energy supply that is always enough to be there. If energy regulators think it's more efficient and better to roll out smart grids and smart metering and all these kind of things, they will actually start running processes or demanding that certain processes in the energy business are run over ICT components, hence bringing up a new set of risks. So who is going to handle that? A cyber regulator? In Switzerland we decided no, it must be the regulator that takes that into their mandate, understands what it entails, and if necessary will bring up the right frameworks. As I said before, if it's a national strategy, it has to be flexible. Why it has to be flexible? Because it has to be custom tailored. Not a bank Financial sector has total different demands if it comes to the use of ICT than the energy sector. Why is that so? Confidentiality is very important for the financial sector, at least in Switzerland. And in the field of the energy sector, it's probably availability. It has to be available. Who cares if someone can actually read where that information goes to, but it has to be available because otherwise there is no electricity anymore. That's two total different trade-offs in goals, for example. So it has to be flexible if it comes to that kind of things. And now we come also to the cooperation. We heard that before, the public-private partnership. That is just something we didn't come up with or we didn't invent, but that's pretty much in line how Switzerland works. We are an extremely federal state. We have a militia system up to the national level and culture, and hence talking to each other is kind of ingrained in our DNA. We have to talk to each other because otherwise the country doesn't work as such. But also comes the other problem. This cooperation has to serve a goal. And the goal is coming actually basically out of this risk approach. One thing is to say, you are in charge of risk management. Now, cyber is an international issue, and it is a diffuse, we heard that too, issue. It is a lateral issue, as a matter of fact, and it's very diffuse to actually understand what is a real threat and what is not a real threat. And if there is a threat, does that threat apply to all kinds of sector? Because, let's be honest, Stuxnet looks extremely dangerous, for example. Probably couldn't care the finance sector less right now, because Stuxnet was not designed for that. At the same time, if Symantec comes out with a new report and says, we have an increase of 200% of malware from 2014 to 2015, that scares out everyone, because it sounds awful. If none of this additional malware is even in the slightest usable to attack an ICS systems, the threat and risk does not change for those that use ICS systems, industrial control systems. So, and if it comes to assessing this kind of developments, that's probably where one company, one critical infrastructure provider alone cannot do the job, and that is where you have to pool your capabilities and your capacities on a national level to support this risk assessment. So basically, the whole thing led to a strategy. 2012, what is it, 19th of June 2012, it was published. You can read it. It's actually available in English. Just Google for it. It has 16 measures, and 1 year later, and that's a rather important thing too, because often strategies get written, but afterwards everyone forgets about it. So it's a good thing to actually have 1 year later something that's called an implementation plan that actually sets out what milestones should be achieved to have the 16 measures in place. So this you can also read. It's also available in English, and it came in May 2013. So, and the strategy at a glance looks basically like this. So you asked before, you have the 16 measures, and if you would take and cluster the 16 measures a little bit, you have everything from preventive measures that support the preventive part of cyber resilience, so risk analysis, threat assessment, and so on, to a reactionary part, which is the incident handling, active measures, Mr. Shea just said. You know, one thing is to defend, you have to look that your systems are close, but sometimes you might also need certain capabilities to make sure that if someone doesn't stop, you make sure he stops, you know, depending whatever that might be. And often also getting forgotten in cyber strategies, if I look around a little bit, sometimes stuff breaks. That's how it is. And if it breaks, you can't be there and say like, oi, we had an ICT failure and we did what we could, but now it's broken. Well, make sure you know actually what to do if that happens. So crisis and continuity management might be a very good thing also from the cyber view. Because one of the fun things is in exercises, if you have cyber exercises, I don't know, every one of you that ever participated in a cyber exercise knows that even if energy drops, even if there is no light anymore and blackouts and disaster on the street, one thing is always working in these exercises. That's your cellular phone and your computer. Why? Because those IT people that would be actually in charge of a crisis like that can't work without it. Very simple. So it's kind of very fun, you know, if it comes to the continuity there. So, and the whole thing obviously doesn't stand alone. It needs supporting processes, and that's also measures in that field. International, education and research, very important. We have 3 measures there, you can read them up. International, just to give you a flavor of that, is, for example, one of the measures is actually telling that regulators and industry have to sit together, identify certain future developments in their fields, try to consolidate and bring themselves in a consolidated manner into international organization and standardization initiatives. Why is that so? Because it's a good thing. Just for the simple fact that if everyone starts looking at the cloud, the aviation regulator and the energy regulators, they will certainly look differently at the development of that. So it would be good if actually there is something like a unique, unified voice. Another one is about bringing in Switzerland's position more strongly into on the security policy level. If it comes to that, there was the OSCE and all this. The OSCE last year, when Switzerland had the chairmanship, for example, where the first set of these confidence-building measures in cyber were passed, and so on. So that's the thing. Important is to understand that the whole thing is, it's not a rigid set of measures. It's actually defining goals, so processes can be triggered. How these goals have to be achieved, that can be custom tailored. That's the very important thing here, because that's the only way how we believe you're able to do it. So, brings me to the point, and I always bring this, I don't know, people that already saw me, because I made the picture myself, so I have to go and show it to you. And I made it to myself years ago, and because when sometimes in the beginning when we came up with the cyber strategy in 2012, there were a lot of people said, coming and say like, it's too not technical enough, and that's not true. If you strengthen the ICT, you know, then everything is fine, and then information will be secure, and forget about, you know, because people are stupid, so even try to empower people. That's, you know, empowering the biggest point of failure if it comes to IT and all these kind of things. And then I tried to show with this picture that this might not be so, because I took this in Munich. I had to change flight from Zurich to Krakow, and I was in Munich, and there was this gentleman sitting in front of me, and I had an old iPhone, so you cannot really read well. But I just started making picture. He didn't really notice me. And I don't know if you can read the watermark there. I had to lighten up a little bit. It says confidential. Okay, so, and he was writing, and it was very interesting because I didn't understand the word actually, because what you don't see, because I had to lighten up the picture, is there was a light green logo on one side of the, on the right-hand side of the paper, light green logo of a petroleum company in Britain. And and it was years ago, and the text, the title there, what you cannot read either, was prototyping in deep shore drilling. I found that it was amazing. I didn't understand the word, but I was really standing about 5 minutes behind this person and just reading along and making pictures, and you know. So what I tried to say is, it's about process. It's about impact. It's about information, and it's not necessarily about IT, because here, your best IT security measures, they won't help you, because that's what's happened. So, that's me. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Marc. So I take away from that, if that summarizes it, that human stupidity will always overcome best technology, right? Good. All right. Thank you. And with that, we're turning to Wolfgang from the European Defence Agency.
Yes, Christophe, thanks a lot. Oops. Where are we? I killed it. Ah, here we are. I'm still killing it. Where is the mouse? Let's take this one. So here we are. So I want to dwell in my short presentation a little bit on the European Cyber Defense Policy Framework as one element of implementation of the European Cybersecurity Strategy. What is a strategy? As such, it's, in the first glance, a patient sheet of paper. And a strategy lives on how it's implemented and how it is lived. And we have to look at a strategy from different angles. The internal effects, that's the own living, but also how a strategy is seen from the outside. And it should not be underestimated the external effects of a cybersecurity strategy or a cyber strategy. Because I also see this as an element. The European cybersecurity strategy was done in a very transparent way, and it's published worldwide. It's also one mean of confidence building for external partners, because they understand how you want to approach the challenges in the cybersecurity world. And what I want to show is now first the genesis of the European Cyber Defense Policy Framework, which is a further development or element of the European cybersecurity strategy. Those who have read the European cybersecurity strategy closely might have identified there are different levels of granularity in. While on the civil side, it was very, very detailed already with a lot of actions. On the defense part, it was very generic. Well, the background for that is that when it comes to common security and defense policy, EU-led military operations, we fully rely on member states' capabilities. And that's the same when it comes to cyber defense for CSDP operations. We fully rely on member states, so we had to consult after the strategy with the member states how much they want to take on and what shall we do in the future. So one of the things with the strategy was how to come from the high level of granularity in the strategy to a very detailed level of concrete actions we have to do. And that's where the Cyber Defense Policy Framework came in as mandated by the Council on Defense Matters in December 2013. And the Cyber Defense Policy Framework was agreed by the Foreign Affairs Council in November last year. What were the objectives of the Cyber Defense Policy Framework based on the strategy and the Council conclusions? First, to identify the priority areas for CSDP cyber defense. From a technical perspective, from a personnel perspective, from a procedural perspective, these are the things to be addressed. Then to clarify the roles of the different institutional players within cyber defense in CSDP operations, but also the role and responsibilities of the member states. Then, how can we integrate cyber defense into the management of external crisis? So the approach was not to establish a new cyber crisis management system, but how to integrate it in existing crisis management mechanisms. Then to outline the principle for cooperation with the private sector, because one of the things, what we saw in the beginning with the European cybersecurity strategy already, there is an enormous potential for civil-military cooperation and civil-military synergies in the area, and for sure also acknowledging the role the private sector plays, as already mentioned by Jamie Shea. They provide the majority of cyberspace, and they operate it. And last but not least, how do we deal with external partners? Because we can do a lot within the union. However, it's a global thing when it comes to cyberspace, so you also have to approach it from a global perspective. Within this, the policy framework, when you look into the headlines I will present now, you will already find them maybe with a different wording in the strategy. And that's one of the things what we clearly aimed for is to bring under each headline or priority area already addressed in the strategy concrete activities. First, the development of the member state cyber defense capabilities. Because without these capabilities, we will not do cyber defense in a CSDP operation, because we have nothing in place. So that's one of the key elements for the European Union. Here we had 7 concrete actions in the policy framework. In the second part, to complete the picture when it comes to CSDP operations, the first task addressed the member states. The second element is to protect the EU-owned infrastructure, which is involved in CSDP operations within the European External Action Service, where the EU military staff is an integral part of. Again, the aspect of civil-military cooperation. We cannot stress it often enough. That's one of the key elements. Military cyber defense is not possible without the civil side, both on the governmental side, but also the private sector side and the academia side. And just to use here one example, in another European Security Roundtable workshop about 1 year ago, we were talking about training, exercises, competencies, and skills. And one of my statements there was, well, what's the military? It's a big, big grocery store when it comes to required competencies and skills. We need network and information security people, like the NIS community. The same we need forensics experts. The same we need cyber threat intelligence analysts. So of all the different sectors we have on the civil side, we have similar requirements. And that's especially when it comes to the second point, to the next point, education, training, and exercises. There is an enormous potential for civil-military cooperation in that area, because in many cases, military cyber defense does not differ that much from civil cybersecurity. The assets we have to protect might be different, but in fact, from the procedural and technical perspective, it's often the same. And last but not least, again, the point of the international cooperation. And here, 8 concrete actions were identified. And it's not the thing that we waited for working on these different subjects until we had the approval of the policy framework. That was work in progress partially already before the cybersecurity strategy, or started with the strategy and then evolving. So about all these different actions addressed here under the different headlines, there are already a lot of ongoing activities. And as mentioned before, we have to adapt to the changing world. Therefore, this policy framework as such is a snapshot of second half of 2014. Therefore, it needs a continuous update due to the development around in the cyber world with new attack patterns and new attack vectors, and for sure the strong and fast development in the IT world. And we are obliged to report in a 6-monthly cycle to the member states about the progress of the policy framework. I want to come back to one point Jamie Shea mentioned earlier, the concept of deterrence. And I think, and also coming back to the confidence building measures, I think what we are following here is clearly the concept deterrence by resilience. And with that, I want to conclude my presentation and happy to receive questions.
Thanks, Wolfgang, for giving us the overview of your work. We have another just under 15 minutes. What I would like to suggest is I have one specific question to our speakers, and I can look in the audience. I think we can collect like 2 or 3 questions and also pass them then by the speakers. I think that's what we can do with the time that's left to us. Now, all of you have presented, of course, and outlined your work and what you've been mandated to do and what you have been doing. Very precisely asking in the sense of our panel, do you feel in your area of work you are ready? And putting it more precisely, do you think you're keeping up with this fast evolving threat landscape? Shall I say, as Paul was mentioning, a lot has been done, but the threats, the environment also changes very fast. Do you feel that you can keep up with that in your area of work? Maybe Jamie first.
Christophe, thanks. If one is honest, one will say that in some areas, yes, in some areas, not so well. I think where we've done very well in NATO is to get our NSERC established with rapid response teams and to protect our own networks, which I said at the beginning was far from obvious. I think we're doing in NATO very well in the education and training area, which is what international organizations, as Wolfgang was saying, tend to do well with all of these exercises. I think we've made a good start with the minimum standards, the identification of the critical dependencies, and the defense planning side. The areas, of course, which I think are still lacking are, first of all, how you deal in a military operation with a major cyber attack that could put your systems out of function for a long time, including weapon systems. We need far more sort of information and expertise there. That's the first thing. The second thing is, how do you manage a cyber crisis? Because sometimes if you don't respond in the right way, you could actually make the situation worse. And how to get the political side to catch up with the technical expertise as well. I think that's another issue. And then the third one, I think, is a good one, which was mentioned by Wolfgang, is that in any strategy, you need to develop your capabilities, but you also have to constrain what your opponents are doing. For example, if you're building better tanks, but you're using arms control to get your adversary to stop producing tanks, then clearly you're going to draw a level and get an advantage. And so we have to see what we can do in the international sphere. Wolfgang rightly mentioned, also my colleague from Switzerland here, the confidence building measures, the laws, the rules, the verification, the transparency, which will sort of give us a sort of a better idea of how, when we deal with this, how much we have to put in our own defense and how much we can rely upon international rules of the road and norms to protect us. So again, as always, if one's honest, it's always a bit of a mixed bag.
Okay, thanks. Jamie, Marc, how do you feel about it?
Well, I think I can echo probably most of what was just said. Especially in some parts we are there, in some parts we are not. But I think let's look at it a little bit. I'm a little bit more optimistic in this kind of things and try to have a positive look at that. I think one of the most important things that happened over the last couple years, 3-4 years maybe, is the fact that the issue is not understood anymore as a pure technical issue. It is the understanding that there has to be a certain policy layer involved. Even if you look at 10 years ago, if cyber something happened, it was a rather rigid, centralized institution that had to handle that on the national level, usually called CERT, GovCerts, national certs. Even if I'm not a friend of rebranding, nowadays they are all called NCSCs, and they have a little bit like GovCert, I don't know what you want to call them, certs plus, certs. It doesn't matter. Fact is that the understanding that this is an issue that lies in a lot of people's turf and garden, so to speak, also starts making the system and the learning curve more flexible and more quickly. So from a positive point of view, yes, we have a little bit to catch up because we were very much focused in the last 10 years on a very specific way to handle this, which came usually out of a technical understanding. And nowadays, more and more people understood that they actually have a role to play too. And then you have a classical natural development. As soon as people start understanding that that is a responsibility that they have to take care, you have more people actually running, so to speak, after that rapid evolution you said. And that usually makes the system more flexible and quickly and probably not able to catch up, that's never the case, but narrow the distance, so to speak, and not be just involved in standing there and looking at the train passing by and thinking about what to do next.
Okay, good. If you want to raise any questions, you can give me a hand sign while Wolfgang is answering. I'll take note, and then we have a few more minutes for that. Wolfgang, what do you think about the European Defence Agency? Are you ready?
Well, for the agency perspective, I think our defenses are quite good. What I want to say is more, well, cyber defense or cyber security, it will be a marathon. And we just passed the first 10 meters. So I think that's one of the things we have to realize, that it is not a thing to be solved from the beginning or in short term. But I think where I'm quite positive is about, we have achieved problem awareness. And that's the first step to a solution. And from my personal view, I'm a Navy officer, I always compare the EU a little bit with an oil tanker. It's very difficult to change the course of an oil tanker. It takes miles. But once the course is changed, the tanker is running. And I see this from a European perspective, also with respect to cybersecurity. We have the problem awareness, we have changed the course, and we are now running. And well, at the moment, the adversaries or the attackers are still in a slight advantageous position. We see this just when it comes to cybercrime in the billions of annual turnovers through cybercrime. But I think this will improve in the next years.
Okay, thank you. So I think we have a first question there. Please identify yourself and please keep it short with respect to the time.
Okay. Okay, this works. My name is Wim Bartsoen. I'm from the private sector, banking sector. I have a question which is, in a way, somewhat rephrasing the question of Christian. And it's a question for Wolfgang. How would you define your own success in this matter? And so what criteria, well, if I would simplify it, where would you want to check boxes to say, okay, mission accomplished?
Okay. Do we have more questions right here, right now? No, then Wolfgang, go ahead.
It's difficult to check boxes. So we started the work, especially in the EDA, about 3 years ago with a landscaping study, where the member states are at the moment with their cyber defense capabilities. And to that survey, at that time, 20 member states responded. So we had a start point. We want to do another update of the landscaping study in 2 years to see where have things improved. But for example, what I can already address as a tangible example, we did a cyber defense training need analysis for the member states. And within that training need analysis, we identified in the current course and training landscape one major shortfall, and that were training courses for decision makers, to take up their responsibilities in the cyber domain, not to leave the decision making primarily to the IT guys somewhere in the basement. And this course we developed in the last year. We have piloted a course and an exercise. We have piloted them last year in spring and in autumn, and we will do a next iteration this year. And I think, based on the feedback we got from the participants in these pilot courses, that's already a tangible result we achieved, at least with one member state.
Okay. I think we've understood that the technology here is probably not the most problematic factor, but rather the human factor in putting this together, as was illustrated, getting the right processes, the right people. In the discussion this morning, it was pointed out to me several times how important it is to mix the communities, because apparently right now we're working in silos. If you're in defense, you're looking for defense experts on IT. If you work in another field, then you look for experts out of there. How important would you, from your point of view, see it is to mix these communities, and what does it bring if we do mix it? Maybe Marc go first.
Well, mixing community, I mean, all mixing for community and sitting around the round table and have a powwow and everyone talks to each other and tries to exchange their views on things. Obviously, that's a good thing. What is almost more important for, in my point of view, is to still instill problem awareness. That's pretty much the word, but also instill the understanding. What does this cyber issue specifically for my work? How does that actually how does that apply to me? And if mixing communities, having techies talking to academics, having engineers talking to policymakers, that's a great thing certainly to come to that. But more important is exactly this: the problem awareness in one specific sector. If a security service is mandated with counter-espionage, for example, counterintelligence, that's what usually security services do, a part of other things, then it has to understand that espionage seemingly happens, in different ways, and the cyber issue will probably be one of the issues they will have to understand. Now they have two possibilities. Every time a computer is involved in an intelligence or in an espionage case, they run crying to some technical center of knowledge and have them fix it because they don't understand how this works, or they start actually to understand that they have to have understanding in this. Yeah. Through all the layers, from the tactical to a more strategic understanding. So if community mixing, brings that, absolutely, but I think it will automatically has to happen because it has to instill the thought, because once they do their job and also understand that cyber is part of their job and they know how to handle it, that's actually when we can talk, because a lot of time it's the classic thing. We have technical understanding, but we do not have the translation process yet in place to make that understandable and applicable to those that are actually really affected by this.
Okay, good. Wolfgang, how do you relate to that?
I want to refer again to the workshop I already mentioned last year. I remember the starting position. There were cybercrime people, there were network information security people, and they started about arguing how specific the competencies and skills are they need for their work in their area. And I come back to my grocery store example, because it was really for me to say, well, we need also the skills a cyber policeman has or needs, the same as a guy who has to protect a network or who is part of a computer emergency response team. So that's, from a military perspective, a cooperation between the different sectors brings an enormous potential for better solutions, from my point of view. And for sure, also from a very selfish position from the military perspective, over the last decades, defense budgets were cut year by year, and we have to leverage on developments on the civil side. Therefore, that's the selfish aspect of it. So getting the different communities together from a military perspective is crucial.
Okay, thank you. With respect to time, Jamie, I'm looking at you for your last word. You have 20 seconds,
On this one, I'll promise to be brief. I think, Christophe, it's an interesting question. I mean, there are two aspects. There's, first of all, of course, forming the community within the community. And as I said, in the cyber area, that doesn't come as easily as it does when it comes to identifying tanks or Patriot missiles that one NATO country is willing to transfer to NATO. We know in NATO exactly how many tanks and missiles we have. We know exactly how quickly they can be sent to Turkey under a NATO command. We don't have anything like that in the cyber domain. We don't know what capabilities countries have. They're not going to tell us, not yet. And we don't know if they could be potentially available. So you have to sort of take that sort of collective approach into the cyber area. For example, take the data, the information sharing thing I mentioned, which is a critical issue. You get certain NATO countries that cooperate massively. You've heard of the Five Eyes, for example, arrangement in terms of intelligence sharing. And if you can open that up and get the Five Eyes to share the same sort of information with other countries, Germany, for example, or whatever, then you're making progress. So there's an internal aspect first. Now, the external aspect, I think the key thing here is negative and positive incentives. Yes, we've got to talk to industry, but then industry thinks, well, yes, but if we share information with the government, we're going to be held liable. We're going to be sort of named and ashamed. The government's going to impose standards on us. And let's face it, we've spent millions of dollars discovering this piece of malware, and the government expects us to give it away for nothing. Out of our patriotic duty. And so if we help you, government, what are you going to do for us? And the government's going to say, yes, well, we're going to sort of provide you with intelligence. We're going to provide you with expertise. So what I'm saying is that the cooperation, if it's to last, can't just sort of be for the good cause. We have to sort of figure out positive incentives, and we have to see where the obstacles are. Let me just, final word, give you an example, not related to cyber, but I worked on for a long time, biometrics, where we had a big problem catching people who planted roadside bombs in Afghanistan because the military biometric information, because it was classified, couldn't be put on an Interpol or an FBI database. And eventually we cracked that issue by signing a memorandum of understanding. So sometimes also positive and negative incentives. What are the obstacles that prevent these communities being formed, and what can you do to lift them? That's the way it lasts.
All right, thank you, Jamie, for the illustrative example at the end as well. I don't think we've exhausted the topic, but we may have exhausted the audience. And in any case, we've come to the end of time. So, seriously speaking, I hope we gave you some good inspiration for the further discussions outlining the topic. I would like to thank all the speakers for your contributions. Thanks very much. And as I understand now, there's a lunch break. So, thank you very much all, and enjoy.
Okay, enjoy.
Danke, Wolfgang. Das war mal wieder gut und interessant.
Oh, thanks.